Hi, everybody. This is intelligence. Intelligence is about 5% of the multiple choice portion of the AP exam. Most of this chapter is easy. You gotta watch Battle of the Brains. And I'm sure if you're my student, I've given it to you on Google Classroom or some other way, but it's called Battle of the Brains, and that will make this chapter go so much easier. It's a good video and it's entertaining. Okay, moving right along. So let me ask you a question. How smart are you? It's not the easiest question because some of you are like, well, I'm smart in some ways, but I'm not smart in others. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. And that's why a lot of psychologists are looking at it too. But then again, is there a way to measure it? How do you define it? And how do you measure it is what this chapter is about. And are these ways of measuring it any good? Okay. So if we define, and you don't need to write this down, but if we define intelligence as the ability to learn from experience, the ability to solve problems, and use knowledge to adapt to new situations, well, then that sounds good. But then by that definition, is Einstein the same intelligence as an average baseball player? I don't know. You know, it seems like we need some way of saying that Einstein is more intelligent. Or let me ask you another question. Would you rather be Oprah smart or Einstein smart? You know, is charm intelligence? I don't know. It seems like it belongs in there somewhere. Emotional intelligence, the ability to read other people. That's got to fit somewhere in there. You know, could Einstein read other people's body language? That seems to fit in there somewhere. Okay. So anyway, that's what we're going to talk about in this chapter. Now, you don't need to write this down, but I'll give you something to write down on the next slide. But back in the day, just a little history, there was a guy named Charles Spearman. History is not that important on this test. But Spearman, what he did was he gave lots of people different kinds of intelligence tests, like a language test, a math test, visual spatial tests, basically like IQ type questions. And what he found is that when a person did well on one of them, they tended to do well on all of them. And so Spearman came up with the concept of the G factor of intelligence, simply meaning that some people are simply more intelligent than other people. And this is kind of stuck because, we have the IQ nowadays, okay? And we tend to think that people with high IQs are generally overall more intelligent than people with low IQs. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I am hesitant to just accept that as fact. And I think we all are to some extent. So, and I don't think factor analysis is something you need to write down. One year I used to have students write this down, but for some reason, I don't think it's ever been on the exam. But do write this down that's in the red. What is the G factor of intelligence? Spearman what he found was that there was a general intelligence. If you just remember that G stands for general and that it's similar to IQ, that'll be good enough. All right, so just write down the bold at least. But yeah, so some of us have higher general intelligence than others. Just think of it as something similar to IQ. All right, moving right along. So Spearman's G factor refers to what? Look at your notes. You should be taking notes. Okay, the answer is general. G is for general abilities. Okay, now that's not an AP question, but this one is. All right. So which one of the following describes Charles Spearman's G of intelligence? Okay, look at your notes. The answer is, okay, general intelligence. General intelligence. Okay. Now this next one is an AP question. I think this one is a challenging question. General intelligence test scores obtained during adolescence best predict which of the following. I don't think I got this one right when I answered it first. And a lot of my students don't get it right either, and I can see why. It's a tricky question. All right, first, rule out any answers involving emotional intelligence, like feelings and things like that. Roll those out, and then you'll get it down to 2, and then you got to make a hard decision. The answer is A. Basically, this is what A is saying. Generally, intelligent people do a better job at their job than unintelligent people. I think we can agree with that. The problem is why is it not D? Okay, well, grades and intelligence do go hand in hand to some extent, but there are so many examples, and you know what I mean, of people who are really intelligent and they just don't do well in school. You know somebody like that. You probably would look in the mirror and recognize this. Super intelligent people sometimes just don't do well in school. They may be bored. My wife was like that. She was so intelligent, she was bored in school. She ended up dropping out and failing all of her classes. It happens. I always have students who are super intelligent and their grades suck. So I understand that it's hard to choose between A and D, but it's a challenging question. All right, moving right along. Now, so there was a guy that came along named Howard Gardner. And he came along and he said, no, Spearman was wrong. There is no general intelligence. And Howard Gardner even said that IQ is inadequate, that there are multiple intelligences. How did he come up with this idea? Well, he studied what are called savants. Okay? Savants are people with a limited mental ability, but they are exceptional in one area. I mean, they're good at one thing and just one thing only, but they suck at everything else. So write this down. What is a savant? They're people who are really good at one thing, but they're bad at everything else. Okay? I'm going to show you a video. Probably he has to live with his sister. He might be financially independent, but it's almost like on Family Guy, Meg's bird whistle. It's a useless talent. Okay, now he gets paid for it, but he really can't live by himself. He's very dysfunctional. But that's Stephen Wiltshire. He is a savant. He's got very low IQ, but all of his brain power is focused on that one talent, and that is it. So write this down, and then we'll move on. Okay, so we just watched a video on Stephen Wiltshire, and he is a savant. So hit pause and write that down, but I'm going to move on, okay? So he's good at one thing, but that's it. He's not good at anything else. Very low IQ, okay? All right, moving right along. So now, the film Battle of the Brains is really good because it goes over all of these multiple intelligences, and you do need to be familiar with them. Now, do you need to write them all down? I don't know. I mean, in my mind, most of them are self-explanatory, like visual spatial. Once I show you what it is, you'll understand it. Can you mentally rotate objects in your mind? Can you pack a trunk? You got a bunch of stuff and you want to put it in a trunk. Can you make it all fit? That would be visual spatial intelligence. And guys do tend to be better at that than girls. That's just the reality. Verbal linguistic intelligence. That's talking, speaking, language, lingua, tongue, lingua, language. Girls tend to be better at that. So if you are verbally and linguistically unintelligent, you're going to struggle in school. Okay? Girls do tend to be better at that. Girls, they tend to start talking at around 1.5, and boys, they tend to start they start talking around 2 years old. So girls are they tend to be better at verbal linguistic intelligence. Logical mathematical, can you do logic problems? I'll show you some in a second. Mathematics, and these top three, visual, spatial, verbal, linguistic, logical, mathematical, those are done on traditional IQ tests, traditional intelligence test. What Howard Gardner says is he says that there should be more intelligences beyond just the traditional IQ. And these are very controversial. Bodily kinesthetic. Are you clumsy? If so, then you might have low bodily kinesthetic intelligence. Can you do athletics? Can you dance? If so, then you might have high bodily kinesthetic intelligence. Musical rhythmic. Do you have a good musical memory? Can you create music yourself? I have very high musical intelligence. When I hear just a few seconds of a Star Wars soundtrack, I know exactly what that was in the movie. Okay, and I know the difference between certain genres of music. That is my thing. I think I have high musical intelligence. Now, these next two are a little confusing, so I'm going to explain it to you. Interpersonal intelligence. And by the way, if you combine inter and intra, that's like emotional intelligence. All right, but let me go back. Sorry. Interpersonal. Do you understand other people? Can you read other people? Do other people take you by surprise? Like, oh my God, I wasn't expecting them to do that. Then that is a judge of your interpersonal intelligence. So to help you, I thought, what is another word that begins with inter? And I thought intersection or interstate. Interstate highway is a highway that crosses state lines. So an interstate highway is between the states. Inter means between. Okay? So interpersonal intelligence is your ability to read and understand and predict other people. Intrapersonal is you understanding yourself. Okay? And I thought, what's another word that begins with intra? And I thought intravenous, like an IV. Intravenous, IV, inside yourself. Do you understand yourself? Can you predict how you will feel if this situation comes up? So make sure you know the difference between interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligence. I have seen that on the AP exam. Okay? All right, moving right along. So here's a quote that supposedly is by Einstein. It probably is. And this is a quote that I've seen this in teachers' classrooms. And Howard Gardner would agree with this. Everybody is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. So this is something that Howard Gardner would agree with. But then again, I don't know. I mean, not everyone is a genius. I mean, how do we define genius, you know? It kind of puts a lot of pressure on us, though. Okay. All right, so for fun, I want to show you some Intel IQ test questions. This is a test of your spatial intelligence, visual spatial intelligence. If you rotate this object here, which two of these are the same figure as this? And it turns out that guys tend to be better at this. Okay. All right. Hit pause and look at it if you want. The answer is down here, written upside down. Okay, moving right along. Here's another intelligence question. Okay, so hit pause, but I'm gonna move on. But the answer is that one. Okay. All right. Another one. Okay, hit pause if you want, but the answer is that. So these are like logic questions, okay? So here's another one, find the pattern, but the answer is, now of course this is just for fun. These are just like intelligence questions. And if you're sleep deprived, you're gonna do worse on them, okay? This is a general knowledge question. The acronym RSVP originally came from the French term Répondez s'il vous plaît, true or false? And the answer is true. You either know it or you don't, okay? General knowledge. All right, here's another visual spatial question. Okay, hit pause, but I'll give you the answer. The answer is 1, 3, and 6. Okay. All right, so again, same thing I already taught you. So these are Gardner's multiple intelligences. You got linguistic, lingua, tongue, language, okay? And then you got logical, mathematical, IQ tests, math problems, logic problems. Spatial intelligence, can you see objects and rotate objects in space? Musical intelligence. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence, can you dance? Can you play sports? Are you clumsy? Are you coordinated? Interpersonal, understanding other people. And intrapersonal, knowing yourself. All right. These are intelligence questions that are measure linguistic and logic. I don't really want to spend any time on these. Okay. Here's another logic and visual spatial question. If you put together this box on the left, which one of these would you get? The answer is A. If you fold this up, which one of these boxes would you get? And the answer is, so this is logic and it's also visual spatial. Okay, you see the pattern? If you want, hit pause. And if you're on Edpuzzle, I'll pause it for you, but I don't care what, just trying to help you enjoy this. But the answer is, and by the way, I didn't get all of these right either. Okay, I'm not saying that I'm some genius and I got all these right. I got this one right. I think I choose the ones that I got right to use as examples, because in case I ever have to explain it. But that doesn't mean that I got all of these right. But here the answer is, okay. One reason is D has no corners and the other one does. And another is when it intersects, it doesn't create a circle, but when these intersect, it creates the same shape. Okay. Here's a logic question that will take you some time if you want to do it, but it is a logic question. Okay, so if you're not on Edpuzzle, hit pause. But here is the answer and here's the explanation. Okay, hit pause, I'm moving on. Here's another logic question, and I didn't get this one right. Hit pause if you're not on Edpuzzle, but the answer is, and the explanation. Hit pause if you want to read that. I'm going to move on. All right, write this down. Robert Sternberg comes along and he says Gardner's cool, but I think he says that intelligence can be divided into 3 kinds of intelligence. You got analytical intelligence, which is good for school and logic questions. Analytical is what's measured on IQ tests and academic tests. Then you have creative intelligence. I mean, come on, don't you think that being creative is important? How many uses for a sock can you come up with? That's called the multiple uses test, okay? Can you overcome functional fixedness? You know, can you use a piece of dental floss to cut a cake? And then there's and can you do art and music? That's also creative intelligence. And then there's practical intelligence. I like to think of practical intelligence as, you might say common sense, but I don't like the word common sense. I like to think of practical intelligence as, are you handy around the house? Here's something that I literally just don't seem to be able to do. Every time my windshield wiper needs to be replaced, I have to go to AutoZone and get them to help me. I just can't seem to do it by myself for some reason. And I'm a really smart guy, but I can't seem to fix things. When the toilet breaks, I have to get somebody to fix it. I'm just not good at fixing stuff around the house. I would say that's a good example of practical intelligence. And just common sense, like when you hear gunshots, do you turn your head and look toward the shots, or do you run away? That's something that I messed up on. So maybe my practical intelligence isn't very high, but my analytical and creative intelligence is pretty high. I am creative. I can make memes and I have good ways of explaining complicated things. But practical intelligence, I'm not pretty good at that. Anyway, have these written down. And Sternberg loves triangles for some reason. Okay. All right, moving right along. Okay, so multiple choice. This one is not that easy of a question. Let's go back to Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory. Go ahead and look at the question, hit pause, but the answer is, okay, a diverse curriculum, one that's not just traditional IQ. So all this other stuff, he doesn't say we should emphasize this other stuff. He's saying that we should have a diverse curriculum. Okay. All right, here's an AP question. Barbara is a talented architect. On which type of intelligence will she most heavily rely on to complete her next building design? Okay. Hit pause, but the answer is, since she's an architect, spatial. She's got to fit all this stuff in a small place. All right, when a person of limited intelligence shows exceptional abilities in art, music, mental arithmetic, or calendar calculations, but is only good at one thing, we call that savant. Okay, I have not seen this on the AP exam, but emotional intelligence, also known as EQ, it's basically inter and intrapersonal intelligence. You don't have to write this down, but basically think about it. Would you rather be Oprah smart, or would you rather be Einstein smart? Something to think about. Okay. I haven't seen this on the AP exam, but it's something to really think about. It's something more it's something real. People with high EQ probably make more money than people who are just super in IQ, intelligent. Okay. All right, so how do we assess intelligence? Well, there was a guy named Alfred Binay. He was French. And what he did was he was trying to help students who needed help. He worked for the French school system back in the 1800s, and he wanted to develop a test to measure where kids were. Think of like special ed or something. He wanted to help kids, not label them. So he created the concept of mental age. So basically, what does an average 8-year-old need to know by the time they're 8? What does an average 12-year-old need to know by the time they are 12? That's called mental age, created by a guy named Alfred Binay. And then Terman from Stanford University comes along and he creates this calculation. Now remember, and then nowadays, so what we call the IQ test We take Alfred Binay's name, combine it with Stanford University, and we have what's called the IQ, intelligence quotient. Remember, quotient is the answer to a division problem. Okay, so you give somebody a test, and you give, and then that ends up, and what they get is a mental age, how they are mentally, what age they are mentally. And you divide it by their actual age, their chronological age. You multiply it by 100, like a percentage, and then you get what we call the IQ. And so write down all the red, and we'll talk about that the rest later. But we're going to do some calculations. Okay, go ahead and try to calculate this stuff here. Okay, so let's do a little math. Okay, so an 8-year-old has a mental age of 10. Okay, so think about it. What is her IQ? Okay, so you could say, well, 8 is the mental age. You put it on top. 10 is her actual. Oh, no, you could, sorry. An 8-year-old, so the actual age is on bottom. You're going to make a fraction out of it or a division sign out of it. So do we put 8 over 10 or do we put 10 over 8? Well, you put the mental age on top, and then you put the actual age on bottom. But I've got a better way of thinking about this. Okay, so think about it. An 8-year-old has a mental age of 10. Is this kid above average? Or is this kid below average? Well, she's 8 years old, but has a mental age of 10, so she's above average. So her IQ is going to end up being over 100. So this is what I do. This is how I think about it. Put the big number on top. Okay, so 10 over 8, you divide, and then you go 8 and a 10 with a remainder of 2, 1 and 2/8, 1 and 1/4, and you get 1.25. You move the decimal twice by multiplying it by 100, and you get an IQ of 125. Okay? So that's how I do it. I think, all right, is this person, do I put the big number on top or do I put the little number on top? That's how I do it. To me, that just makes more sense, but to you, it may not. So here's another one, okay? A 12-year-old has the mental age of 9. Okay, so this person took a test and they got the mental age of 9 based on a test, but the kid is 12 years old. So is this kid above average or below average? He's below average. So what I would do is I know that the IQ is going to be less than 100, so I'd put the small number on top. 9 over 12, reduce that to 3/4. That's 0.75. So that means this kid has an IQ of 75. That's like Forrest Gump, okay? All right. So Freddie is a 10-year-old boy with a mental age of 12. What is his IQ? Okay, well, is this kid above average or below average? Since Freddie is above average, then you know the answer will be an IQ of above 100. So you don't have to do the math. You go straight to D, because it's the only answer they gave you that's above average. Okay? All right, 2 more. If Shaniqua has a mental age of 16 and she is only 12 years old, then what is her IQ? Okay, is she above or below average? She's above average, so put the big number on top. 16 over 12, reduce that to 4/3. You divide that, you get 1 and 1/3. So that means 1.33. So you have an IQ of 133. She's practically a genius. Charles has a mental age of 12, but he is 16 years old. What's his IQ? Okay, so Charles is below average. Okay, so you put 12 over 16, you reduce it to 3/4, and then that's 0.75, so you end up with an IQ of 75. Okay, that's how you calculate IQ. Okay, I tell my students to draw this and put everything, including the question at the top. What is a normal bell curve of IQ scores? Normal means you have a bell curve. It's shaped like a bell, okay? Normal means that most of the data is close to average. What is the average IQ? 100. Most people are within 15 points above or below. 68% of everyone is above or below by 15 points within the average IQ. So look at that, 68% is between 85 and 115. Now, since you've made it this far in this class, you're probably above average intelligence. So if you're more than 115, then you're in this segment. If you have less than a 70, you are what we call intellectually disabled. We used to call that mental retardation. If you have more than 130, then you are what we call gifted. That means you're here. That's gifted. All right, so take a few minutes and draw this entire thing. Okay, moving right along. So if Charles's intelligence quotient is 100, we know that he has a what? Okay, the answer is he's average. That's average. Okay, wow. Okay, so in a normal distribution, which of the following statements is true about the area that falls between one standard deviation above and one standard deviation below the mean? All right, let's go back. I didn't teach you this. These lines are what's called standard deviation. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know how I'm going to teach this just verbally. Standard deviation, think of standard meaning average and deviation meaning change, average change. And like, for example, let's take a classroom, a psychology classroom. And you've got juniors, you got seniors, you got a few sophomores. What is the standard deviation of ages in a classroom? It's about 1 year. On average, people are about 1 year apart in a normal classroom that I teach. With IQ, the typical distance between people on average, if you take everybody in the entire world and you average their differences, you get 15 points. So on average, we are all about 15 points within each other. Some more, some less. And we call that average standard deviation. So if you are one standard deviation above the mean, then if you're in this range, 34% are just under one standard deviation above the mean. But if you are more than two standard deviations above the mean, that's 2%. If you are 2 standard deviations below the mean, 1, 2, you have intellectual disability. But to go back to the question, if the question said, what is true about the area that is between 1 standard deviation below the mean and 1 standard deviation above the mean? Okay. The answer is D. Okay? The middle 68%. The middle 68%. Okay? All right, that's enough for this.